How could your prophet marry such a young girl? السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. How do you answer that question? I'm going to make the argument today, inshallah, that the best response is this. How old would you have liked her to be? And let me explain. There is something called ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism is the belief that your culture, your way is inherently better than the other culture. And we're all victims of this. In America, we think that we're better than the Canadians. The British think they're better than the Americans. The Australians think they're better than the Austrians. And it just goes on and on and on. But of course, the truth is, the Americans are better. So ethnocentrism, every nation is afflicted with that anyways. Pakistanis think they're better than Afghans. Afghans think they're the best. And Sudanese think they're better than Somalis. And it's true, they're better than everyone. But the point is, every nation already has that, right? They think their way is the best way. And they think their language is the best language. And it can get to a level where we're so convinced that we have the best morals, we have the best system, we have the best culture, that I have the right to go into other cultures and question them based on my standards. Did you stop and think about that for a minute? Why are your standards so superb that every other nation and even different eras have to go by your standards? So let's look at this issue one more time. The story begins, one of our teachers, he told us that he was in Czechoslovakia one time and he was at a gathering which he didn't like. So he got up and left that gathering looking for his hotel. He said, I found a Czech woman in the street and I asked her, I told her the name of the hotel and she recognized what I wanted and she gave me directions, deep directions in full Czech, and I don't speak Czech. So I apologized and I told her, I'm sorry, I don't understand. And she could understand from the body language that he didn't get it. He says, so then she repeats the instructions again in Czech, just slower. So I still didn't understand. So when I apologized one more time, he says, she hit me and walked away. Why did she do that? He says, because she thought I was dumb. What is wrong with you? Why don't you understand what I'm saying? I'm speaking to you clearly. And she's just being ethnocentric. She's saying, how could you not understand my language? Why don't you understand what I'm saying? There must be something wrong with you. And again, we do that all the time. Ethnocentrism. So now, the same sheikh said, I was at a conference in the UK. And it was question and answer time. And someone put his hand up and said, Sheikh, I have a question. The man said, why aren't we allowed to eat pork in Islam? Why is he asking this question? Because he lives amongst the people who eat pork casually, normally. It's not a problem for them. And what happens with ethnocentrism is that even though every nation is ethnocentric, when that nation is a strong nation, the weaker nations start to think that their way is the best way. The way of that nation, the strong nation, is the best way. And minorities living amongst that majority also start to think the way of the majority is better. So a Muslim living amongst non-Muslims who eat pork will question and ask himself, why can't we eat pork? Everyone else is. But watch how the sheikh answered the question. Actually, the sheikh said, before I could answer the question, the organizer said, let me handle this question, the MC. And he asked the man a question. He says, how come you didn't put your hand up and ask, Sheikh, why can't we eat dogs? And the answer is that you don't live amongst people who eat dogs. So you're not curious. Maybe if he lived in China, he would ask, how come we can't eat dogs? You know, it's like you see some roast dog, looks really good. It's a different kind of hot dog, okay? So you see this dog, looks so delicious, like, I need some dog right now. So he doesn't really desire dogs because British people don't eat dogs. They eat pork, so you start to question yourself, how come I can't eat pork? And that's exactly, going back to the age of Aisha, that's exactly what happens. That the West has almost unanimously, but to a degree, decided on the number 18 as the best age to get married. And they think this number is so proper and so correct that they have the right to go back 1,400 years back in time and question an entirely different society, culture in a different part of the world based on what they think is the norm. Why didn't this culture 1,400 years ago follow what we decided upon? When did you decide upon this number 18? Recently. It's not even like a long time ago. It is in recent history where they decided for some reason number 18 was when you should be allowed to marry yourself off. Now, some clarifications. Number one, there's no science and nothing behind this number 18. How did they decide upon it? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. It's not based on science or studies or anything. Just people decided this number. The other thing is that it doesn't say that 18 is when you can get married. 18 is when you can marry yourself off. For example, in the United States, in multiple states, a woman can get married at age 17, age 16, some states age 15, and others age 14 until today, as long as her parents sign off. So you're not even against marrying before age 18. You're just saying when she's old enough to marry herself off at 18. But one more time, the question is, what is this based on? Is it based on science? Is it based on a study? It's not. You just recently decided on this number. And that's why when you go into recent Western history, you will find in America there were statesmen who were married to 9-year-olds, to 11-year-olds, and it wasn't a big deal. And you find also amongst nobility people who get married at 12 and 13 and so on and so forth. So only recently you decided on this number, and you think it's so great that I can question your prophet from 1,400 years ago in a different culture and society and say, how come he didn't follow what we came up with recently? When you say it that way, you find how arrogant it is and how it doesn't make sense, right? So the question becomes, are we advocating marrying young girls today? Are we saying it's acceptable? Or is that what we're defending here? And the answer is no. What we're saying is that if within a given culture it is something that is acceptable, and we know that it was done, and we know it was not bad in the eyes of the Arabs back then, because the Quraysh, the enemies of the Prophet ﷺ, they wanted any reason and any excuse to revile, to badmouth, to attack the Prophet ﷺ, to find some kind of mistake in him. And if marrying young women was a bad thing, then immediately they would have said, oh, look at your Prophet, he marries a young girl. But a number of things indicate that it was culturally okay for the Arabs. Number one, Ayesha was already spoken for. She was supposed to marry someone else, and then that kind of collapsed. So that means this is an age where they could get married in that culture. Likewise, Umar radiallahu anhu, the Khalifa, towards the end of his life, he marries a very young daughter of Ali radiallahu anhu. Kulthum was her name. So this was common amongst the Arabs. Now, let's understand it within that cultural context. Let's take an example of a nomadic tribe that lives in the desert, or a very, if I can use the term, primitive tribe that lives in the middle of the jungle or something like that. Imagine now this tribe where basically the maximum skill any woman can learn in that tribe, these are the following skills. 1, how to pick berries. 2, how to clean the hut and how to cook and clean the animals that the husband brings in. It's a very, like, if I can use the term again, a primitive tribe. They don't have any technology or anything. So if a girl at age 11 or 12 reaches that level and she has this knowledge, she is just as knowledgeable as a woman who is age 60. There's nothing else to learn in this jungle. The young man, once he learns how to hunt and create his own weapons and build his own hut, he has reached the maximum, the top level of knowledge there is to learn in that community. So now if a 15-year-old boy in that tribe wants to marry an 11-year-old, according to this setting now, they're both culturally mature, and of course they're physically mature. We can't deny that part. It's actually easier for a woman to give birth at an earlier age than it gets more difficult at a later age. 40 and above, it gets more difficult. So even physiologically, the body is set up, or our human beings are set up to be able to have birth at that time. So the question is, are they mentally mature or not? In our world, in the Western world, she's still in school when she's 11 and 12. She's still playing with dolls and everything, because the way society is structured, she's still a child. She couldn't possibly get married. But now going back to that jungle, when the girl is 11 or 12 and the boy is 15, and they both have learned everything that's within their world, why can't they get married? Imagine on the day of their marriage, a white guy from the West comes and he interrupts the wedding ceremony and he says, no, we're not going to have any of this. This is not acceptable. Excuse me? Why not? Because in America, this would not be acceptable. Well, you know what? Start the fire. We're going to cook this guy for dinner. We're going to eat him. So it doesn't make sense, you see, the guy interrupting in that way. The same way it makes even less sense to go 1,400 years ago and interrupt and say, look, this is not acceptable by our standards. What if someone argues that my problem is the big age gap, that there's about a 40-year age gap? Are you being honest with me? Your only problem is the age gap, or is your real problem, that she was young? Because we said culturally that was not a problem for the Arabs. No, it's the age gap, I insist. Okay. Then do you have a problem if a man who's 100 years old marries a 60-year-old? No? Oh, so then it's not the age gap. So that's how you answer this question. You ask the person, and when someone tells me, why did your Prophet marry a young girl? I ask him, how old would you have liked her to be? And he says 18. I said, well, how did you come up with 18? Science? Any study? Any evidence? No. How about 17 then? Okay, I'll accept 17. What about 16? Whatever number he says, I question it. If he says 12, I question it. If he says 14, I question it. What are you basing it on? If you want to base it on biology, whenever the woman reaches menses, she can have children. Now, if you want to argue up here, is she psychosocially mature? Then that's another question. And depending on the culture, she could reach that maturity earlier. That's inshallah azza wa jal how you answer that question. Never allow anyone to embarrass you with this question. Everything that our Prophet ﷺ did is good, and there's nothing embarrassing whatsoever about his life. Sallallahu wa barak ala Muhammad. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.